welcome. Thank you so much for listening and watching us for this special conversation on trauma, memory, and healing. My name is Lucia Lynch, and I am the Trauma and Resilience Strategist and Mental Health Researcher at Footprint to Freedom and the lead of Handprint to Healing, our mental health initiative. So this is a recording conversation, and it is created especially for survivors. It brings together two expert voices, a survivor and a psychiatrist, to openly speak about how trauma affects memory, emotions, and healing. So our goal is to offer an honest, trauma-informed mental health education that is supportive, respectful, and easy to understand. We will explore practical tools for building resilience, making sense of trauma responses, and how survivors and professionals can work together to create safer, more empowering support systems. So I am joined today by two incredible speakers. First, we have Professor Cornelius Katona, a psychiatrist and research and medical director at the Helen Bamber Foundation, and honorary professor at University College London. Professor Katona has recently carried out various research activities on mental health effects and therapy needs for human trafficking survivors. And we are also very honored to be joined by our very own at Footprint to Freedom, Chilean Ifiazu, an anti-trafficking advocate and survivor herself. She is the founder of Female Returned Migrant Network in Nigeria and works to support survivor healing in empowerment and reintegration. So let's begin by hearing a brief introduction from each of our speakers. Professor Katona, would you mind starting us off, please?
Thank you. I'm delighted to take part in this session. I'm a psychiatrist by trade, a mental health professional, and I have a particular interest in the mental health consequences of trauma and how people find and how people may be helped in finding ways of moving beyond trauma, not being defined purely by trauma, not being defined as victims, and finding ways of continuing to live or starting again to live productive, thriving lives. I think that one of the important contexts in which to place all this is that, particularly in host countries, countries that people who have been traumatized move to for refuge, it is very difficult to rebuild their lives because of the new post-migration uncertainties that they face. And I think awareness, not only by survivors themselves and by the people directly involved in looking after them, in supporting them, but also by policymakers, by national organizations that welcome or fail to welcome such people. I think awareness of the consequences of trauma is extremely important.
Absolutely. Thank you for mentioning this. And especially you said that traumas or people should not be defined by their trauma. And that's a statement that Print to Freedom really tries to preach to our survivors who especially may be struggling with trauma. And it's not something that defines them. And there's just so much to do from awareness raising and policy making from host countries. And we are so honored to have survivor leaders in these countries to be making these changes. And one of them is Chilean. And Chilean, could you please introduce yourself for all of our listeners and viewers?
I hope I'm able to communicate as much as I can what I do. My name is Chilean Ife Azo. I live in Nigeria and I'm also a Nigerian. I a survivor of human trafficking and right now a survival leader. Like Lucia said, I'm the founder Female Returned Migrants Network. So my trafficking experience happened in 2017. And between 2017 to 2019, I didn't even know that I was a survivor of a crime. And most of the things I experienced within the sector during my reintegration is the reason why I decided to empower other survivors, help them understand what has happened, help them process their experiences and heal from the trauma, which that the sector at the very beginning did not prioritize. I work with the International Organization for Migration as a volunteer to offer peer mental health support to the migrants who are coming, especially survivors of human trafficking. So this is the much I can say about what I do because it's a lot and I find it really hard to communicate what I do. Thank you.
Chilean, you do a lot, and it's incredible everything that you do. And I remember you just mentioned that what your experience, you didn't know it was a crime till afterwards. And I think we've found that a lot of survivors have similar experiences, which in itself can be traumatic, not having the trauma in the moment, but in hindsight. So, one of the questions we hear a lot about is like, what does mental health look like after trauma? And this is a lot of what survivors are facing. So, Chilean, from your experience or things you've seen working with survivors, how does trauma affect your mental health or mental health of survivors that you have worked with emotionally or day to day?
Okay, so I'll start by saying that because of where we live, because of this region, majority of us as survivors do not even recognize that we are traumatized. That's where I will start from because I know that I didn't even get any help because I never communicated as someone who was traumatized or who experienced any form of trauma. And I know that it affects our mental health deeply. Emotionally, you're carrying this invisible weight. You're just, always experiencing fear. I remember some of the at the very beginning, some of the things that were happening to me. If anyone around me goes somewhere, I always feel like they won't come back. Relating to what happened to me in Libya, I feel sometimes that they are not going to come back. So I'm constantly calling them, I'm constantly reaching out. And until my brother called my attention to it, I didn't know that I was, transferring this fear onto every loved one around me. Sadness, I didn't trust people. I felt like the people around me were the reason why I got trafficked in the first place. So it means that it's going to happen again if I trust people. I didn't trust anybody. I had anxiety, you know, just it affects day-to-day tasks and activities. And the sad part is that survivors do not understand or recognize that trauma is the reason why they are experiencing all of these things. So you find that some of them tell you about how they just cannot focus on things. They have this today they are trying to build this, tomorrow they are running away from that one and building another. But then if you put two and two together, you figure out that it's because of their past experiences that these things are happening. So trust me, it's happens in different aspects of our daily lives. I only got to know that trauma was my problem last year. Imagine since 2017 until now. So it just affects almost everything. How we lead, how we talk, how we, you're communicating and you're communicating in anger without even knowing that it's because of the previous experience. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing, Chilean. And it seems like it is a something that survivors have to deal with for every day for the rest of their lives. And by not having an idea of what's going on inside their brain and what trauma is, it can kind of inhibit their journey to healing. And Professor Katona, what would you say, or that Chileans experience resonates with other survivors you've worked with, or how would you describe mentally and emotionally what is happening for many survivors?
I think Gillian described her experience beautifully, and I think that a lot of what she says applies to many, many other trauma survivors.
Yeah.
Having said that, I think the experience and the response to the experience of trauma varies enormously. And one of the most important things to bear in mind is that not everybody develops a diagnosable mental illness as a result of trauma. Many people do, but many people don't. And within that, I think it's also important to remember that that's not a question of some people are stronger and some are weaker, some succeed and some fail. There are many, many things that determine whether or not people develop a diagnosable mental illness, and to do so is not a failure, it's just the way that that particular person responds. So that's one important thing. A second important thing is that if people do develop a mental illness, that may not always be post-traumatic stress disorder. It may also be depression. It may also be anxiety. There is some evidence that there's also an increase in the risk in the long term of developing psychotic illness, but that risk is relatively small. So very, very variable. I think another point that Chilean made that I would like to emphasize, amplify, is the notion of trust. And I think that one of the things that people who have been traumatized by the deliberate cruelty of others, what tends to happen is that they find it difficult to trust other people. The things that up until then they took for granted about people by and large being predictable, by and large being benevolent, being nice, those basic assumptions about other people tend to break down, as does the assumption about oneself as being worthy of respect. That is another assumption that very often breaks down. And so a lot of what needs to be done in therapeutic work is to rebuild the ability to trust others and rebuild the notion that as an individual, one is deserving of respect. I think that can all be particularly difficult because even when people have come out of a trauma situation, a situation of trafficking or a situation of torture, they may nonetheless face enormous uncertainties, and they may nonetheless face quite real rejection from their community. And so dealing with those uncertainties may make it much harder to come to terms with what has happened in the past.
Yeah, absolutely. So at Footprints, we work with hundreds of survivors, and we notice that like every healing is different for each person. So you saying that if you don't have these feelings or experiences, it is not a failure, I think is so, so important to recognize. And I'm sure that rebuilding trust is a very difficult task as a clinician, and especially when it's placed in a space with so much stigma around them and community. So survivors have to rebuild trust not only with their families and support systems, but trust in their community that gives them stigma often. And one of the things that we've heard that survivors often struggle to approach clinicians is because of the stigma that they carry with them. Also because when they also, Chilean, feel free to jump in if this is something that you've experienced or have seen others experience. But when they approach clinicians, the experience that they have is often that they are treated as something is wrong with them, or that they make perhaps pathologizing their experience. So experience their trauma as an illness rather than something that was part of their lives. So I'm curious to know how mental health professionals can meet survivors where they are without making them feel like something is wrong with them or that their experience was something that they can write about or in a diagnosis in other words.
If I can make a start on that, I mean, I think one of the most important things is for the clinician not to see the individual in front of them as purely a victim, as purely defined by their trauma. They're people who come with complex past lives, with multiple strengths, as well as with having been traumatized, and they deserve respect as individuals and respect for their strengths. And so being trauma informed, but not allowing trauma to be the all defining thing, I think is very important for clinicians to try and practice. It's also, I think, important to try and make that meaningful in the moment. One of the things that a lot of people who have been traumatized repeatedly, and I'm thinking particularly of people who've been trafficked over a long period or tortured over a long period, they have had a long period of confinement in which choice has not been part of their lives. They have not been able to make even minor choices. And to be able to show them respect and to be able to allow them to make minor choices without being overwhelmed by choice is important. So saying, would you like to sit in this chair or that one? Would you like a glass of water or a cup of coffee? Is important. On the other hand, it might also be important not to overwhelm with choice, because in our daily lives, we have to make so many minute by minute choices. I often illustrate that by imagining going into a Starbucks. Now, there are lots of ethical issues there, but let's just assume one goes into Starbucks and one wants a cup of coffee, and one is then overwhelmed by choice. Does one want it with whole milk, half fat milk, soya milk, almond milk, cinnamon sprinkles on top? So many choices, too much if for several years you have not been able to make any choices at all. So a few choices indicative of respect, but not too many, may be very helpful as a principle for clinicians.
Absolutely. Chilean, do you think that in general, these choices that survivors face on the day-to-day is can be overwhelming? Or yeah, how would you reply to Professor Katona's point here?
Okay, so I think that what he has said is actually true. One of the things that I want to shed light on in respect to what he has said is that you have these professionals expecting a certain kind of outcome when they approach survivors or when they are working with survivors. The outcome I had with A is the outcome I want to see with B, or because it's trauma and I've seen it before, I've seen it in people, and I know that this is what this person has gone through. So I'm assuming that this is what I want to see at the end of the day. Now, sometimes you end up even hurting the person more because you're not listening, you're not paying attention to exactly what they need. For some persons, they just need you to listen and prioritize them, give them that agency. It's their life, But then you have professionals trying to push a certain outcome, force the survivors to do certain things to make sure that they are responding to the kind of outcome that they want to see. So I think he's correct, and I'm hoping that professionals pay attention to listening to survivors, paying attention to their person. Some survivors don't even need to go through any therapy. For some of them, you just need to empower them with that information on how to, go forward with their lives, what they need next, the next steps. And for some, you don't even need to give them those next steps. Just guide them on where to get the information that can help them. And you find out that they are doing well, they are blossoming. And I think it's because there is this tag, for every survival. Yes, because you've gone through this, you're traumatized. I won't forget an experience with an organization. He was asked to talk to us about why they don't permit survivors to work with them. And he generalized it. He said, so because they are traumatized, I think they need about 2 years after trafficking to heal from their experiences. So if I need 2 years, the other person, does she also need 2 years? Do you think that each of us have the same experiences because we've been trafficked? There are people in various forms of exploitative situation, and when they come out, do not put all of their experiences together. I've seen it before. So yes, they all need time to heal before we can employ them, or before we can guide them or help them make progress in their lives. So I think that this is a very important point. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think at the root of what both of you are saying is that just treating people and as their experiences are is just the foundation of healing and helping others. But I think it also goes above that. And I think it's important for clinicians and professionals and anyone working with survivors to understand, like our leader Malaika Oringo always says, that survivor, they are an expert of their experience. They are the expert, and centering their voice and their healing is important, and understanding that it's not someone you work on, but you work with, which for me seems to be the core of how to improve these relationships and how to really dig deep and facilitate survivor healing, is understanding that they are the expert. They are the ones who've seen it all, been through it, and we need to uplift their voices. So the fact that 2 years, they're not including survivors for 2 years because they need to, they're the expert. We should be hearing survivors rather than, making decisions for them. So thank you both for sharing. And then a next topic that survivors wanted to speak about was memory. And often understanding the link between memory and trauma has been unclear. And many survivors have mentioned that they struggle with their memory. Professor, what do we know scientifically about the relationship between trauma and memory, and how trauma affects memory?
Well, we've already said that things are very variable.
Yeah, exactly.
And the effects of trauma on memory are also very variable. But I think one helpful way of thinking about it is that the effects on memory are dictated by trauma inducing a sort of fight or flight response. And there are elements of brain function that become overactive, and there are elements of brain function that become underactive. For example, one area of the brain, the amygdala, tends to become overactive during the fight and flight response, and another, the hippocampus, which is what tends to be most involved in what we think of as memory, but particularly memory for context, tends to be underactive during periods of extreme trauma and heightened emotion. And what that means is that the contextual framework, the contextual background to what is happening tends to become more blurred, whereas the very, very vivid emotional connotations of traumatic memories are amplified. And so because they're amplified, they tend to be re-experienced over and over again. And it's that re-experiencing that is reflected in the flashbacks and in the nightmares and in the intrusive thoughts that are hallmarks of post-traumatic stress disorder. On the other hand, the contextual memory, like, did it happen on a Thursday or Friday? Was it morning or afternoon? Was the weather sunny or cloudy, those things don't get fully recorded in memory and therefore are difficult to retrieve. And that in turn is why, as I understand it, a lot of people who have been traumatized find it difficult to provide those contextual details. And that in turn is why their accounts appear incomplete and why in turn they are often not believed. Surely you should remember X or Y or Z. Well, no, my brain wasn't working as it normally does at that time. It's entirely understandable that I don't recall those details as fully as you think I ought to.
Mm. Absolutely. I feel like the stigma around not just mental health, but even just recalling memories is so layered. On one hand, people are like, come on, you don't remember this, like what's happening? And then the other, when people do express PTSD symptoms or experience, vivid flashbacks and all of these things, then there's a stigma with that too. So how can we help survivors feel less shame around this, less shame about remembering, about not remembering, about feeling self-doubt when they do remember or don't? How, in general, how can we help survivors feel less shame and self-doubt around all of this?
Okay, I think one of the things while Professor was speaking, one of the things that came to mind, because I'm someone who has been asked various questions by both people in the mental health sector, media, and sometimes when these questions are asked, I know that some of those experiences, I don't even want to communicate or go back to relive, right? And so I think one of the things that can help is allow survivors to go at their own pace. There was, I think last year that I had a I don't know how to say, it's a program. And during that program, I had the opportunity to share with my partner in the program my experience. It was the first time I remember that I was put in a vehicle and locked. You know how the back of a Helos is? I mean, years after, I haven't even talked to anyone about that experience, put in the back of a Helos and locked in the back of a Helos while the driver was speeding. You know how that experience is. And I was wondering after the conversation, we were talking about something else, and I'm like, do you know that I've not remembered this incident for years? So survivors need to take it at their own pace. You don't force them to remember anything. With time, maybe, because I know that everything seems to be like a broken pieces. I just try to put them together one after the other. Sometimes I write about my experience and I'm unable to write everything, all at once, but I'm able to bit by bit put them together. And I've also learned to stop forcing myself to remember what happened to me, because it's not helping. It's not helping me heal. It's not helping me move forward. And so when experts and leaders are trying to make you remember everything because they want to work with the information, sometimes it makes it look like, just like Professor said, like we are lying. But it's my experience. So why force me to remember because you want the details? That's exactly what came to mind. Thank you.
If I can add a tiny bit to that, just building on what Gillian has just said very, very clearly. I mean, I think a lot of the education needs to be of the clinicians and of the decision makers, that they should not disbelieve so easily. Because a tendency to disbelieve leads to wrong and unfair decision making, but also because disbelief is itself very damaging. And so understanding the context in which it's difficult for people to give full and clear accounts is really important. So that is something that both survivors and clinicians can help decision makers to understand better. The other thing we need to remember is that even outside of the context of trauma, it is very difficult to remember everything accurately. If you ask me what I had for breakfast this morning, I can probably tell you. If you ask me what I had for breakfast a week ago, I probably can't. But in addition to that, if you ask me what I had for breakfast and I say porridge, that might be because I had porridge for breakfast. It might also be because I had nothing for breakfast and don't want to start a conversation about how important it is to eat something early in the morning. So we also, all of us, not just survivors, we all of us make choices in what we choose to remember and what we choose to tell people we remember. And those choices are every day. And we can't, it is not legitimate to expect survivors to behave the whole time as if they were under oath.
Absolutely. And I think this conversation goes beyond uh, uh, clinicians and in this experience in general, treating everyone um, as their story is just not how it needs to be, but rather letting people speak on their own time, not forcing an answer or a story because it fits with your narrative is so important. And giving people the space that they need to share with you, I think in the long run will create this trust and belief system that is so needed today and between clinicians, between survivors and policymakers. So having things come at their own time. Yeah, like you mentioned, I can't remember what I had for breakfast this morning. You can't have these expectations on people just because you're sitting in this setting, and it fits with, you know, your notes that you're writing, and your idea of constructing a survivor. So, yeah, I think this was a wonderful point, and thank you both for sharing. And then something else that survivors have mentioned uh, after, you know, their trauma, the importance of building resilience and strength. Obviously, that experience is different for everyone, but Chilean, what have you noticed that has helped? Obviously, it's different for everyone, but helped people to begin feel emotionally stronger or gain control again? What are some things that perhaps you've noticed working with survivors?
So I'll start with myself. I'll say safe spaces and survivor inclusive spaces, which I had to create myself. I remember that in 2019, I had to create a female survivors network that started with just 30 persons. And the conversation within 1 month was basically our experiences, how we're feeling, how the sector was treating us. Having safe spaces helped me a lot, and it's still helping. I mean, the ASC, I know that also um, because of my experience. So when I get to these spaces, I'm first of all very vigilant. I want to know if what I share would not turn around to become, but then when this space is inclusive of survivors and mainly championed by survivors, I am comfortable to share. And when conversations are led by survivors, I feel like survivors get healed better, or it makes them emotionally stronger. Another thing that has helped me personally is telling my story, not the entirety of it. I mean, I had from 2018 started talking about my experience and to vulnerable people. So I'm not talking about telling professionals or people who are in the sector to collect stories. No, I'm talking to vulnerable people and figuring out that sharing my experience with these people helps them prevent trafficking or helps them understand what it was really helpful for me. I mean, having most of them come back to say, oh, I was almost trafficked, and because you shared your experience, this happened. I almost followed my brother to Mali, or I'm going with my boyfriend, but hearing you talk in this program, I feel like that helped me. It's even energized me to create more forums. I mean, going to communities was inspired by the fact that I started seeing results. I saw that people were, in most cases, no longer gullible to all of the information traffickers were bringing to them. So that empowered me. Another thing was having mentors who understood that I didn't want to talk about just my experience. I wanted to do things differently. And having those people around me, having them listen to me, having them learn from me, not just imposing their ideas. You know, there's a difference between listening to me and learning from me and trying to impose your ideas. You know, they listen, they guide, they are not imposing anything, but they were guiding me on, okay, since you want to do this, I think if you do it this way, if it's okay, you know, when you allow survivors take the lead in those conversations, you're actually helping them heal. I also know that another thing that has helped me is community. I would always say, I'm planning to write on it, is the fact that I had people who believed that I am a human being who's made a mistake with this, my decision to migrate, but then they are not holding me as, they are not shaming me for it. So whatever happened, they didn't hold that information. So they held me there. They took care of me. I remember I was in the village. A friend said, "You need to come out of the village, come and stay with me." And she didn't try to create environments that would trigger me. She made sure I was feeling safe. She made sure we were going out to places I was comfortable going to. And when I want to sit all alone, she didn't impose, no, you don't sit alone, stand up, come with me. You know, she was really there for me, you know. And after staying with her for a while, I also think that another community that helped me was working with the IOM. I think most of their staffs were really informed. It was on volunteer basis, but I didn't feel like I was a volunteer. I felt like I was leading conversations, I was leading initiatives, I was, you know, giving the agency to lead on so many things, and that was really helpful. It's helped me heal. So I have my family, which, regardless of the fact that that was where the trafficking issue generated from, but you know, I had them fully in support of every vision, every dream I have. They supported with taking care of my son, so I'm not feeling burdened, you know. So having community is also one thing that helps survivors heal fast. I don't know if I'm fully healed. I like to say that because sometimes, once in a while, it comes back to me that, oh, something happened to you in 2017, you know, but then, you know, I've built resilience because I've got a lot of people who believe in me. Just even saying kind words. I know that some of the kind words I've heard from people, oh, you don't look like a survivor of this crime. You've built yourself in such a way. And I'm like, oh, even when you see those ones that look like what they've experienced, please do not make them feel like they've experienced it. So I think that people should consciously try to also say kind words to survivors of this crime. Thank you. I'm sorry, is it noisy?
No.
Okay.
I absolutely hear you, and I agree. I think at the center of it all, we need to lift survivors to a point where their voices are at the center and we are learning from them. And I think that's at the core of what we've spoken about today. And I also believe and agree with you. I think we can extend kind words to everyone, and I think that helps everyone heal from whatever trauma they're going through. And is a key part of healing is treating people as human, being there for them, and offering someone a voice or an ear for them to listen to. Uh, and Professor Katona, is there any practical tools, or would you like to say address anything that Chilean mentioned, or add on to her experiences and those of other survivors?
I mean, I think pretty much everything that I was going to say, Gillian's already covered and covered much more eloquently than I can. But just to try and say it in a slightly different way, I think that from a clinician's point of view, it is important to think about partnership, to think about working together. It's not that I am working for you, you and I are working together towards something. And that is part of that goes very closely together with the notion of different forms of expertise, lived expertise and learned expertise that go together, which we've already talked about. But I think that at the beginning of a clinician survivor relationship, there's an importance of respect, mutual respect. And I think also an importance of welcome. You are welcome here. This is a space in which you feel welcome. I think it's important to try and encourage the development of peer groups, of ways in which survivors can support each other and work together to provide or to facilitate opportunities in which survivors can be something other than victims. Now, that can be in terms of voluntary work, it can be in terms of education, it can be in terms of paid work, it can be in terms of learning leisure or vocational skills as well as sort of professional work related skills. So at the Helen Bamber Foundation, for example, we have language groups. We also have photography groups. Now, most of the people coming into those groups have not had a particular interest in photography before, but learning a new skill and learning a new skill together and learning to respect each other through learning a new skill together can all be very helpful. I think another important notion is of reliability. We as clinicians, we as a support team need to be reliable. We need to be predictable. We need to manage expectations rather than giving unrealistic expectations and then letting people down. And one last thing that I was going to say, which I think touches importantly on what Chilean's already said, is that it's not just that people take different lengths of time to recover, but that recovery isn't simply symptoms going away. Recovery is functional. Recovery is being able to do things, not just loss of symptoms. And the other point, and it's one that we make time and time over at the Helen Bamber Foundation, is that it's much more difficult to sustain recovery than to achieve symptom resolution, because even a long time after they have come out of a situation of trauma, survivors are, like it or not, more vulnerable to distressing symptoms coming back, to vulnerability coming back in situations that remind them, that trigger past trauma. So nobody should be too overconfident that once symptoms have resolved, they will not come back. One needs to remember that there may still be underlying vulnerability, and that isn't a sign of weakness, it's just the way things are and something that needs to be respected and taken into account.
It sounds to me that healing is it's not a destination, but it's a journey that goes on and on and on. In that along this journey, offering mutual respect, welcome, in peer support groups and just both of you mentioned community in different capacities is really at the core of helping this journey not reach a destination, but making it as smooth and well heard as possible. Uh, and I'm so grateful that you're both here, because I think that this is a conversation that really needs to be had. And we've actually touched on most of my questions already. We went through them incredibly well. But as we close off this discussion, if there is one thing that you both could say to a survivor, or just any person that's listening to this, who might feel overwhelmed or unsure of their path or their journey, what would it be?
We should go first, Julian.
First of all, I would say, don't wait for anyone to help you heal, because I think that sometimes having that expectation that I depend on the professionals, I want to depend on, you wouldn't heal, especially if you live in this part of the world where we barely believe that anything happens to your mental health, even if you fall from the skyscraper. We have the belief that you don't need any help. As Africans, just here, if a child falls down, they say, stand up, dust yourself, and keep going. So nobody believes in trauma. I'll just say that, first of all, know that nothing is wrong with you. I'm not saying this because I, I don't know how I'm going to say it. Some persons who would hear it might say, oh, because you're in a better position now, you think it's okay to tell someone that nothing is wrong with them. But I know that people carry different forms of trauma, but you just first of all should assure yourself that nothing is wrong with you. Trauma is not, it's not something that I want better words to suit what I'm communicating, but I know that the first step, the first way to go is to know that nothing is wrong with you. And going over life as though something is wrong with you can also make it really hard for the professionals to even know where to come from to support you, because there's already a narrative out there, and if you're pushing the or making them feel like, oh, something is actually wrong with me, it might be hard to give you the actual kind of help or support you need. So nothing is wrong with you. Again, another thing that I can also say to any survivor who is listening out there is, find communities that you would join to help with your journey. It's a journey, right? Like Lucia said, it's a journey. So find communities that can actually help you, make progress on your journey, make progress on whatsoever you've decided that you want to do. Also, I want to say, reduce the anger on the systems, because I know that that's one thing that would continue taking you back to relive that experience over and over. That anger on the systems, because I know that the systems always disappointing us so far. From the points when I returned to Nigeria till now, there is always disappointment coming from the system. I think less relying on the system until we are able, as survivors, to communicate how the system can be better. Rely less on the system, and find support groups with survivors who would hurt you less. Again, I'll say, set boundaries. Setting boundaries for survivors is very vital. I think that that is one thing that has also helped me. I have boundaries with even people who are professionals in the sector. If you understand how to set these boundaries, it's able to help you um, go forward on your journey. Another thing is, I would not say completely trust the people you're working with, but be open-minded. I know that I had issues with trust, but I think being open-minded and trying to understand. So last year, during Survivor Alliance program, the power of the collective, I learned that the people in the professionals that we are working with and ourselves, we are not entirely speaking different languages. We are speaking same language. We are saying the same thing, but using different words. So again, we as survivors, if you want to achieve some level of healing, be open-minded to work with people in the sector. You can communicate how you feel when you think that someone's approach is not helping, but traumatizing you even more or making you relive your experience. I think another thing is communication. So as a survivor, find ways to communicate how you feel. Don't hold it back and wait for when the person has done one more thing. This part of the world, especially in Nigeria, we say, I count it for you once, I'm counting it for you two, I'm counting it for you three, and then you explode. No, try to find ways to communicate how you feel about how someone is treating you, especially because you want your healing journey to be smooth and easy. I know that we don't entirely heal from this trauma because I think it's been how many years and I'm still on the journey. So on this path, I know that if you try to ensure that you also have daily routines that can help you manage everything that you're doing. Another thing that Professor mentioned was overwhelm. I think survivors, sometimes we are overwhelmed by everything, and then it keeps taking us back to those experiences that we've had. So if you're able to have like daily routines, you have maybe, I don't know if it's okay to say that if you can look for survivors that are also accountability partners to help you, do daily routine that can help you heal gradually. That's my recommendation. Thank you.
Wow. It's hard to follow on that. Just a couple of thoughts. I mean, I think one idea that emerges from what Gillian said is the notion that trauma changes people, but it can change people in a positive way as well. And the notion of post-traumatic growth can be quite a helpful one for clinicians as well as for survivors. But if I was advising wannabe clinicians, I think the first thing that I would advise is to listen actively, to follow the trail rather than trying to fill a checklist. So people will say interesting and individual things, follow those things because you are talking to an individual. One of the first things I learned as a medical student was it's not helpful to talk about the appendix in bed 3. It's the person in bed 3 whose appendix has burst. So one needs to remember that we are talking to individuals, we are talking to people, we're not talking to people defined by a particular thing that has happened to them. And in that light, it's also important to remember, and again, I'm echoing what Gillian said, it's not about what's wrong with you, it's about what has happened to you. Tell me about that. Tell me how you've changed. Tell me about how you were before, what you did, what your interests are, what you are as an individual. So help people to express their whole individuality, not just their victimhood.
Thank you. Thank you both for sharing. And Gillian so amazingly mentioned that we are all saying the same thing with different voices. And that's true when we speak to survivors and we speak to professionals. At everything's core is just meeting people where they are and finding, like Professor Katona said, the trail of human voice that you see with them. You're not no one is a checklist, and that goes for both sides. And this conversation gives me so much hope for as we move forward and for creating these safe spaces for professionals and for survivors, and even for policymakers to listen to us and listen to professionals, survivors, and create these safe spaces. And yeah, I have so much hope, and I'm so grateful for both of you for being here today, and lending me your expertise, especially as I navigate this research world, this survivor world. And yeah, thank you so much, and thank you everyone who will be listening to this. And very grateful that you're both here and have lent your expertise.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Lucia. I know that this project is going to have a lot of impacts because, like I said earlier, it is something that hardly anyone is thinking about doing, and coming on with this initiative, it means a lot, especially for Africa, where we don't believe that anyone needs to heal from anything. So thank you.
Absolutely. And I'm very grateful for both of you for being here. Wonderful. So, if anyone has any questions, feel free to reach out. But that is a wrap on our discussion.